The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan village as Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her grip on the M24 sniper rifle. Her hands were steady despite the chaos erupting around her. The Taliban fighters had launched a coordinated attack on the forward operating base just as dawn broke, catching the American forces in a vulnerable position during shift change. Maria had been a sniper for 3 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The enemy had positioned themselves strategically in the mountains surrounding the valley, using the high ground to rain down gunfire on her unit. Her fellow soldiers were pinned down behind concrete barriers and damaged vehicles, unable to advance or retreat safely. The radio crackled with urgent voices. "We need immediate support on the North Ridge. Multiple targets engaging from elevated positions." Her commanding officer's voice was tense but controlled. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional tactics weren't working against the enemy's superior positioning. Maria crawled to the edge of the rooftop where she had taken position. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle flashes from enemy weapons hidden among the rocky outcroppings. The Taliban fighters had chosen their spots well, using natural cover to make themselves difficult targets. Traditional infantry assaults would result in heavy casualties. Her spotter, Corporal Jenkins, lay beside her with binoculars pressed to his eyes. "I count at least 12 hostiles on the main ridge," he whispered. "They've got the whole valley covered. Our guys can't move without exposing themselves." The weight of responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders like a heavy blanket. She had trained for moments like this, spending countless hours on the range perfecting her marksmanship. But training on static targets was vastly different from real combat where lives hung in the balance. Below in the courtyard, she could see her fellow soldiers taking cover wherever they could find it. Some were wounded, being dragged to safety by their comrades. The medics worked frantically to treat injuries while staying low to avoid the incoming fire. Every few seconds, bullets would strike the concrete near them, sending chips of stone flying through the air. The enemy fighters seemed confident in their position. They had planned this attack carefully, waiting for the perfect moment when the base was most vulnerable. Their automatic weapons chattered continuously, keeping the American forces suppressed and unable to organize an effective counterattack. Maria's training kicked in as she began to analyze the tactical situation. The enemy positions were well concealed, but not impossible to engage. Through her scope, she could identify potential targets by their muzzle flashes and movement patterns. The key would be patience and precision. Her first target was a fighter positioned behind a large boulder on the ridge. She could see him clearly when he leaned out to fire his weapon. The distance was approximately 800 meters, well within the effective range of her M24 rifle. She adjusted her scope for windage and elevation, taking into account the morning breeze that swept across the valley. The crosshairs settled on the target area. Maria controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment when the enemy fighter would expose himself again. In sniper training, they had taught her that patience was often more important than speed. A rushed shot could miss and reveal her position to the enemy. Seconds felt like hours as she waited. The sounds of battle continued around her. The crack of gunfire, shouted orders, and the occasional explosion from grenade impacts. But in her scope, there was only silence and focus. This was what she had trained for, what she had prepared her entire military career to do. The enemy fighter leaned out from cover to acquire a new target. In that instant, Maria squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and through her scope, she watched the target drop. Her first shot had found its mark. "Good hit," Jenkins whispered beside her. "Target down." But there was no time to celebrate. The remaining enemy fighters had heard the distinctive crack of the sniper rifle and were now searching for her position. She needed to move quickly before they could locate her and return fire. Maria shifted to a new position on the rooftop, staying low to avoid detection. The tactical situation required constant movement and adaptation. Standing still too long would make her an easy target for enemy snipers or rocket-propelled grenades. Through her scope, She identified her next target. This fighter was positioned in a different location, requiring her to adjust her aim point and account for the changing angles. The mathematics of long-range shooting became second nature as she calculated distance, wind speed, and bullet trajectory. The second shot was more challenging. The target was partially concealed behind vegetation, making precise shot placement crucial. Maria waited for the right moment, watching the fighter's movement pattern through her scope. When he shifted to get a better angle on the American positions below, she was ready. Another precise shot echoed across the valley. The second target was eliminated, and the enemy's rate of fire began to decrease noticeably. The remaining Taliban fighters were becoming more cautious, knowing that an American sniper had them in her sights. Her fellow soldiers began to take advantage of the reduced enemy fire. Some were able to move to better positions, while others started treating the wounded more effectively. The tactical balance was beginning to shift. But the battle was far from over. The enemy commander seemed to recognize the threat posed by the American sniper. Instead of maintaining their original positions, the remaining fighters began to move, trying to flank the base from different directions. This tactical shift created new challenges and opportunities. Maria realized that her role was evolving from simple target elimination to battlefield control. By engaging the most dangerous threats first, she could influence the enemy's movements and create opportunities for her fellow soldiers to gain the initiative. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature began to rise. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she maintained her vigilant watch over the battlefield. The physical demands of precision shooting in combat conditions were immense, requiring perfect control of breathing, heart rate, and muscle tension. Through her radio headset, she could hear the coordination between different units. Her commanding officer was repositioning forces based on the intelligence she was providing about enemy movements. The sniper's elevated position gave her a unique perspective on the entire battlefield that was invaluable for tactical planning. As the morning progressed, the nature of the engagement began to change. The enemy's initial advantage was eroding under the pressure of accurate sniper fire. What had started as a coordinated ambush was becoming a more fluid battle where both sides sought to gain tactical superiority. Maria knew that her actions in these crucial moments would determine the outcome of the engagement. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but her training and experience had prepared her for exactly this situation. Every shot had to count, and every decision could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The afternoon heat was becoming unbearable as Maria maintained her position on the rooftop. Sweat stung her eyes, but she couldn't afford to break concentration. The enemy had regrouped and was attempting a new strategy. Instead of staying in their original mountain positions, they were moving closer to the base, using buildings and terrain features for cover. Through her scope, Maria tracked the movement of enemy fighters as they advanced through the village streets. These weren't random movements, but coordinated tactical maneuvers designed to overwhelm the American defenses. The Taliban commander was clearly experienced and had adapted quickly to the threat posed by her sniper fire. "Multiple targets moving through the market area," Jenkins reported through his binoculars. "Looks like they're trying to get close enough for a direct assault on the main gate." Maria shifted her aim toward the market district. The narrow streets and closely packed buildings created a complex shooting environment. Civilian structures meant she had to be even more careful about backdrop and potential collateral damage. Every shot required split-second decisions about safety and effectiveness. Her radio crackled with updates from the command post. "Sniper, we have friendly forces attempting to reinforce the south wall. Need you to clear the approach route." The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. Her fellow soldiers were counting on her to create a safe corridor for reinforcements to reach the most vulnerable part of their defenses. Through her scope, Maria could see the problem immediately. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in windows and doorways along the route the reinforcements would need to take. These positions offered excellent concealment while providing clear fields of fire at anyone attempting to cross the open areas. She identified the most dangerous threat first. An enemy fighter with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher was positioned in a second-story window overlooking the main approach route. If he managed to fire that weapon at the right moment, it could devastate the reinforcement team and potentially breach the base's defenses. The shot would be challenging. The target was partially concealed behind a window frame, and the angle was difficult from her current position. Maria adjusted her scope and calculated the trajectory carefully. There would be only one opportunity before the enemy fighter could relocate or engage the approaching friendlies. She controlled her breathing and waited for the perfect moment. The target shifted slightly, exposing just enough of himself to present a viable shot. Maria's finger tightened on the trigger, and the rifle fired with its characteristic sharp crack. Through her scope, she watched the enemy fighter collapse. The RPG threat had been eliminated, but there were still multiple hostiles along the reinforcement route. Time was critical, as her fellow soldiers were already beginning their movement toward the south wall. Moving with practiced efficiency, Maria engaged the next target. This fighter was positioned behind a low wall, using it for cover while firing at the base's defenders. The shot required her to wait for him to expose himself above the wall, timing her shot perfectly with his firing rhythm. The second target was neutralized cleanly. Maria immediately shifted to scan for additional threats along the route. Through her scope, she could see the reinforcement team moving quickly but cautiously through the streets. They were professional soldiers who understood the danger they faced. Her radio came alive with coordination chatter. "Friendlies approaching Checkpoint Alpha. Route appears clear." The relief in the voice was evident, but Maria knew the situation could change in seconds. Vigilance was essential. Suddenly, Jenkins spotted new movement. "Contact, 2 o'clock. 3 fighters moving through the alley system." These enemies were using a different approach, trying to flank the reinforcement team from an unexpected direction. Maria swung her scope toward the indicated area. The fighters were moving quickly through narrow alleys, using the confined spaces to mask their approach. This type of urban combat required different tactics than the long-range engagements she had been conducting. The lead fighter emerged from an alley intersection, and Maria engaged him immediately. The confined space of the alley meant that eliminating the lead fighter would create a bottleneck, potentially trapping the others behind him. Her shot was accurate, and the enemy fighter fell. The remaining 2 fighters found themselves caught in the narrow alley with their route blocked. They were forced to retreat or find alternative paths, buying precious time for the friendly reinforcements to reach their destination. The tactical situation continued to evolve rapidly. The enemy commander was clearly frustrated by the effectiveness of the American sniper and was attempting to adapt his strategy accordingly. Instead of large, coordinated movements, the fighters were now operating in smaller groups, making them harder to track but also less effective as an attacking force. Maria's role was becoming more complex as the battle progressed. She was no longer just eliminating individual threats, but actively shaping the battlefield through strategic target selection. Her position gave her a unique perspective on enemy movements that was invaluable for the overall defense of the base. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows, changing the lighting conditions for precision shooting. Maria adjusted her scope settings to account for the shifting light, ensuring that her accuracy remained consistent throughout the engagement. Through her headset, she could hear reports from various units around the base. The reinforcements had successfully reached the south wall and were strengthening the defenses there. Other units were reporting reduced enemy pressure as the Taliban fighters found their movements increasingly constrained by sniper fire. But the enemy wasn't giving up. Intelligence reports suggested that additional hostile forces were moving toward the area, potentially turning this engagement into a prolonged siege. The stakes were rising, and the pressure on Maria to maintain her effectiveness was enormous. Her ammunition supply was a growing concern. Each shot had to count not just for accuracy, but also for conservation of resources. The logistics of resupply during active combat made every round precious. She needed to be strategic about target selection, focusing on the threats that posed the greatest danger to friendly forces. Jenkins continued to provide invaluable support as her spotter, identifying targets and helping her prioritize threats. Their partnership had been forged through months of training and previous deployments, creating an almost telepathic communication during high-stress situations. The enemy began using smoke grenades to obscure their movements. Gray clouds drifted across the battlefield, reducing visibility and making target identification more challenging. Maria had to adapt her tactics, waiting for brief moments when the smoke cleared enough to present viable targets. Through the smoke, she caught glimpses of enemy fighters attempting to reposition. These fleeting opportunities required instant decision-making and flawless execution. Miss the shot, and the target would disappear back into the concealment of the smoke. As the afternoon wore on, the intensity of the engagement began to shift. The enemy's initial momentum had been broken by the combination of accurate sniper fire and determined defensive action by the base's defenders. What had started as a coordinated assault was becoming a more desperate attempt to achieve any tactical victory. Maria realized that her actions were not just affecting this single engagement, but potentially influencing the broader strategic situation in the region. The enemy's inability to overrun this base would send a message about American defensive capabilities and the effectiveness of well-trained soldiers in difficult circumstances. The weight of that responsibility drove her to maintain the highest possible standards of performance. Every shot had implications that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The outcome of this battle could affect future enemy planning and the safety of countless other American soldiers serving in the region. The evening shadows were growing longer as Maria prepared for what intelligence reports suggested would be the enemy's final assault. Radio intercepts indicated that the Taliban commander was gathering his remaining forces for one last coordinated attack before darkness fell. The stakes had never been higher. Through her scope, Maria could see movement in the tree line beyond the village. The enemy was massing fighters for what appeared to be a desperate attempt to overwhelm the base's defenses through sheer numbers. Her ammunition count was running low, making every shot more critical than ever. "Looks like they're bringing everything they have left," Jenkins whispered as he studied the enemy positions through his binoculars. "I count at least 20 fighters moving into assault positions." The radio buzzed with urgent communications from the command post. "All units, prepare for major enemy assault. Estimated 15 to 20 hostiles approaching from multiple directions. This is their final push." Maria understood the gravity of the situation. If the enemy succeeded in overrunning the base, not only would American lives be lost, but valuable intelligence and equipment could fall into enemy hands. The strategic implications extended far beyond this single engagement. She methodically checked her equipment one final time. The M24 rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the day, but the extended engagement had put stress on both the weapon and the shooter. Her hands were steady, her focus sharp, despite the physical and mental demands of hours under fire. The enemy assault began just as the sun touched the horizon. Fighters emerged from concealment simultaneously from 3 different directions, coordinating their attack to divide the defenders' attention and firepower. It was a well-planned final gambit by an experienced military commander. Maria prioritized her targets based on immediate threat to friendly forces. The first priority was an enemy fighter carrying what appeared to be a satchel charge intended for breaching the main gate. If he reached his objective, it could create a gap in the defenses that would be impossible to contain. The range was approximately 600 meters, and the target was moving rapidly across open ground. Maria led the target, accounting for his speed and direction, then fired. The shot was perfect, dropping the bomber before he could reach the base perimeter. Without pausing, she shifted to her next target. An enemy machine gunner was setting up a position that would allow him to suppress the defenders on the south wall. The heavy weapon posed a serious threat to the soldiers who had worked so hard to reinforce that area earlier. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind a low stone wall, but Maria could see enough of him to make an effective shot. She waited for him to shift position while setting up his weapon, then engaged. The threat was eliminated before the machine gun could be brought into action. The battle was reaching its climax. Enemy fighters were advancing on multiple fronts, forcing the defenders to spread their firepower across several threats simultaneously. Maria's elevated position allowed her to see the entire battlefield and engage the most critical targets as they presented themselves. Her third target was an enemy squad leader who was directing the assault on the eastern approach. Taking out leadership targets could disrupt enemy coordination and reduce the effectiveness of their attack. Through her scope, she could see him gesturing and giving orders to the fighters around him. The shot was more challenging because the target was surrounded by other fighters. Maria had to wait for the precise moment when she could engage without risking collateral casualties that might affect nearby civilians. When the opportunity presented itself, she took it decisively. The loss of their squad leader caused visible confusion among the Eastern Assault Group. Fighters began hesitating and looking around for new orders instead of pressing their attack. This momentary disruption gave the defending soldiers crucial seconds to reposition and strengthen their response. Jenkins continued providing invaluable support, identifying targets and helping coordinate with other defensive positions. Sniper, Command wants you to focus on the northern approach, heavy concentration of hostiles moving through the cemetery. Maria shifted her attention to the indicated area. The old cemetery provided excellent concealment for the advancing enemy fighters, who were using the headstones and monuments as cover. This approach would bring them dangerously close to the base's most vulnerable section. Through her scope, she identified multiple targets moving through the cemetery grounds. The terrain made precise shooting challenging, as enemies would appear and disappear behind cover as they advanced. She needed to time her shots perfectly to catch them in the brief moments when they were exposed. Her next shot engaged a fighter who was using a large monument for cover. She waited until he moved to advance to the next position, then fired. The accurate shot eliminated another threat to the northern perimeter. The intensity of the engagement was reaching its peak. Explosions from grenades and rocket-propelled grenades lit up the battlefield, while automatic weapons fire created a constant backdrop of noise and confusion. In the midst of this chaos, Maria maintained her focus on precision shooting. Ammunition was becoming a critical factor. She had only a few rounds remaining and needed to make each shot count. The pressure was enormous. Knowing that every missed shot could mean the difference between successfully defending the base and facing catastrophic defeat. The enemy assault was beginning to falter under the combined pressure of defensive fire and precise sniper engagements. Fighters who had started the attack with confidence were now moving more cautiously, aware that an American sniper was systematically eliminating their most dangerous threats. Maria's final targets were two fighters who had managed to reach the outer perimeter wire. They were attempting to create a breach that would allow the remaining assault force to penetrate the base's defenses. These were the most dangerous threats at this critical moment. The range was shorter now, but the urgency was greater. Maria engaged the first target cleanly, stopping him before he could complete his breach attempt. The second fighter tried to take cover behind a concrete barrier, but Maria anticipated his movement and was ready when he emerged. Her last shot of the engagement was her most important. The bullet found its mark, eliminating the final immediate threat to the base's perimeter. In the sudden quiet that followed, the remaining enemy fighters began to withdraw, recognizing that their assault had failed. The radio crackled with reports from around the perimeter. "All positions report enemy withdrawal. Assault has been repelled." The relief in the voices was unmistakable. The base had held against overwhelming odds. As darkness fell over the battlefield, Maria finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The M24 rifle had proven its worth, but more importantly, her training and dedication had made the difference in a critical engagement. The tactical situation had been desperate, but superior marksmanship and teamwork had carried the day. Jenkins clapped her on the shoulder as they prepared to leave their position. "Outstanding shooting today, Sergeant. You saved a lot of lives." Maria nodded quietly, understanding that her actions had indeed made a decisive difference in the outcome of the battle. The enemy's well-planned assault had been broken by precise professional soldiering under extreme pressure. The aftermath would bring after-action reports and analysis, but for now, it was enough to know that the base was secure and her fellow soldiers were safe. The M24 sniper rifle had proven once again that in the right hands, precision could overcome overwhelming odds. As she cleaned and secured her weapon, Maria reflected on the day's events. War had hung in the balance, and when the moment came, she had taken aim with the M24 and made the shots that mattered most. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was a burden she carried with pride and professionalism. The base would be reinforced and resupplied, but the memory of this engagement would remain with everyone who participated. It was a reminder of what could be accomplished when training, courage, and determination came together in the crucible of combat. The enemy had learned a hard lesson about the cost of underestimating American resolve and capability.